Hey, deserving listeners, this is chapter 3 of my deep dive on apologies and forgiveness. In this episode, I'm going to dive deep into the research on the factors that contribute to apologies being effective. What should one consider when they're trying to provide an effective apology? But first, I want to analyze an apology by Bill Clinton. Last chapter, I analyzed his first apology, and this is his follow-up apology.
First, I want to say to all of you that, as you might imagine, I have been on quite a journey these last few weeks.
This is a follow-up apology to his first apology. His first apology was done, I think, in haste to get out ahead of the press after his grand jury deposition. I think he predicted that eventually it would get out, so he was trying to get out ahead. And it seemed as though maybe he hadn't really thought about the apology before providing it the first time. I did give him a D grade, not because he didn't flunk, but because, in all honesty, he failed. He should have been given an F for that apology in terms of how I gauge apologies. But compared to other political figures apologizing, he had some strengths, some things that were positive. So I decided to recognize that by grading it a D, which is my designation for slightly sufficient. And now he's providing a follow-up apology, and he starts off by saying he's been on quite a journey, and that's a good thing to start with sometimes with apologies. We want to use this as a jumping off point for our own lives. Sometimes when you apologize, particularly if it's a big deal that you're apologizing for, a big transgression, you might want to have some caveats up front. He is apologizing to me because he's apologizing to the American people, and I was in my 20s around this time. So as he's apologizing to me, when I hear him say that, I'm like, okay, that's a statement that is saying this is a big deal, and I consider this a big deal. This isn't just some flippant thing to me in my life. I've given it a lot of thought. I've been on quite a journey over the past few weeks. So sometimes you want to say that because you want to convey to the harmed individual, I'm not taking this lightly. So let's continue.
To get to the end of this, to the rock bottom truth of where I am and where we all are. I agree with those who have said that in my first statement after I testified, I was not contrite enough.
Okay, so he is saying that he has heard the criticism that he wasn't contrite enough, he wasn't remorseful enough in his first apology, which I would agree with. And he says, I agree with that. I wasn't remorseful, I wasn't contrite enough. That's a good recognition.
I don't think there is a fancy way to say that I have sinned. It is important to me that everybody who has been hurt know that the sorrow I feel is genuine.
Okay, it's hard to know if someone's being sincere. Everything depends on sincerity when it comes to apologies being believed and understood and felt and the person being forgiven. So it's hard to know, right? He has prepared a statement. He's reading from a statement, which is another thing I wouldn't recommend that anyone would do. So it's hard to know if he's being sincere, and you can be the judge of that.
It is important to me that everybody who has been hurt know that the sorrow I feel is genuine. First and most important, my family.
Yeah, so I'm guessing we're not going to hear more statements around that sorrow. If I were to think about my own apologies that I have provided people, I usually try to provide an elaboration, and a lot of apology effectiveness, in my opinion, in my experience, treating couples, elaboration is often the key, particularly if the apology is for something quite significant. I'm just thinking about my own life. If I felt sorrow and remorse, I might say something like, for the past couple weeks, I have been thinking a lot about what happened, and at first I was defensive, but the more I thought about it, the more ashamed I was of it. The sinking feeling in my chest when I thought about what I did to you and that you were hurt by that, it just kills me on the inside. You know, something along those lines. You're talking about your emotion, the physical sense of shame and cringing, and that might help to convey what's really happening for you. Now, of course, you have to be sincere and you have to be telling the truth, but if those things are there, which they probably are, at least if you have eventually gotten to that place, then conveying that, communicating about, having the words for that might help the other person, the harmed individual, to be like, oh, okay, I'm convinced that you feel actual sorrow and remorse. Him saying that, it's not super convincing, but let's move on.
Also, my friends, my staff, my cabinet, Monica Lewinsky and her family.
Now, what would help in this situation is if he actually talked about the harm specifically. Maybe he'll say that. But when we're apologizing, we don't want to just say, I harmed you. We want to identify the harm. And in my deep dive, I go into all the components necessary in a complete apology. And when it's over a big deal, we really do have to hit all 12 of the components on my list. And one of the very first components is not only that you accurately identify the harm, but you fully identify the harm. So I think he is accurately identifying the harm to people that he hasn't even really identified that precisely. I think we all know what he's referring to, but it would help if he actually delineated it, that he cheated on his wife and he lied to the American people. He lied to his wife. And so that is hurtful. He dragged Monica Lewinsky through a situation that she didn't deserve. And then to fully describe how the harm affected the other person, the amount of pain that his wife and child are going through, the humiliation, the pain and the fear that Monica Lewinsky and her family are going through, the pain and hurt that the American people go through when they see their president doing things that are untrustworthy, that lack integrity. It is hurtful. You want to be able to trust your public figures and your politicians. So when I really think about it, this part of the apology is not sufficient because he has not identified exactly the harm and described exactly how people were harmed, the extent of the harm, what they went through. So I don't think we're going to get that because we don't usually.
And the American people. I have asked all for their forgiveness. But I believe that to be forgiven, more than sorrow is required. At least two more things. First, genuine repentance, a determination to change and to repair breaches of my own making.
Okay, yes, good. A big part of effective and ethical apologizing is to internally commit to change and also to convey that. But a lot of times when people, I think particularly public figures, but really everyone, when I'm watching reality TV and there's an apology, there's often something like this where people will say, I'm determined not to do that again. I'm committing myself to never doing that again because I don't want to hurt you again. Okay, that's a good thought and we're going in the right direction. But the factors that led up to him committing all these various harms, particularly to his wife, are not easily changed. One can't just, with willpower, just change all the things that led up to that behavior. It wasn't like you just slipped on a slippery floor and you're like, okay, next time I'm going to make sure that I wear better shoes or something. Like the amount of personality traits, the amount of attitudes, and possibly even how good his relationship is with his wife. Not that his wife and the relationship would be to blame for his infidelity, but that could be a factor. I mean, there just could be, his whole life might need to change in order for him to not do these kinds of things anymore. And so being determined is a good start, but that determination should involve a plan to figure out, why did I even do that sort of thing? And thus, when I know why, or I have a conceptualization as to why, and it would be quite elaborate, there'd probably be 10 significant bullet points on that list. Now I know how to address that, because once I know why, or have a conceptualization, I can actually address those factors such that they won't happen again. Just having willpower, just being determined, just committing yourself to not doing something again is often insufficient, especially when it comes to stuff like this.
I have repented. Second, what my Bible calls a broken spirit. An understanding that I must have God's help to be the person that I want to be. A willingness to give the very forgiveness I seek. A renunciation of the pride and the anger which cloud judgment, lead people to excuse and compare and to blame.
All right, so this is good. I think what he's communicating is he has an impulse to be prideful and defensive and to justify it to himself and to blame others, but he has gone on a journey over the past few weeks and discovered that that's not fair, it's not moral to do that, and so he is now realizing that humility and admitting what he did was wrong and not blaming other people is the right thing to do, and now he's deciding to do that. I don't know if he's referring to his first apology because because he seemingly was blaming the Republicans for the whole fiasco instead of taking responsibility himself. He hasn't done that yet, right? He hasn't mentioned that part of what he was talking about last time of just like, look, I'm only here because the Republicans are trying to persecute me.
And complain. Now, what does all this mean for me and for us? First, I will instruct my lawyers to mount a vigorous defense using all available appropriate arguments. But legal language must not obscure the fact that I have done wrong.
I think what he's talking about is he's saying, look, I'm still going to try to defend myself against the attacks that are unfair, aside from the lies that I committed. But through that process, I'm not going to use technicalities within language to get away with something and to lie. Because remember, he claimed last time, and while he was lying, that, look, I'm just using their definition of sexual relations, which is very specific, and I wasn't doing that. So when I say I wasn't having sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, I'm telling the truth. But of course, that's not how the truth works. You can't use a technicality to get away with lying. So let's say you work at McDonald's and you steal money out of the register, and someone comes to you and says, we found out that some money was stolen on Wednesday. Did you do it? And you know that you actually stole it on Tuesday, but you realize they didn't realize it was stolen until Wednesday. So you know they're referring to the money that you took, but technically you did not take it on Wednesday. You took it on Tuesday. And the question was, did you take it on Wednesday? And you say, no, I never took any money on Wednesday. Why are you asking me that question? You know what they're asking, and you know you're deceiving. You know you're lying. Technically speaking, you are not lying, but it's still lying, right? It's still deceptive. It's still wrong, right?
Second, I will continue on the path of repentance, seeking pastoral support and that of other caring people, so that they can hold me accountable for my own commitment.
Okay, so again, he's apologizing to me as the American people. He's talking a lot about God and religion, I think Christianity, that he's repentant, that he has sinned, and that he is going to seek, I think, counsel from caring religious figures of some sort, and that they will guide him and help him to avoid doing these things in the future. And okay, this is something that a lot of public figures will do. I think a more common thing today would be that they will say, I'm a sex addict and I'm going into rehab, or I'm seeking therapy or something. And that's not a bad idea, of course, but a lot of times the public figures will use that as a way of saying, look, I'm fixing it, that kind of thing, when they might not actually be fixing it, or they might not actually be sorry. I would feel better if you would say something like, I have a lot of issues. I have issues that date back to when I was a kid, and I've sort of known about them, and I've sort of struggled with them over the years. But now that this has happened, it's really forced me to think about it, and I've realized that I have this problem in my personality and this tendency and this way of seeing things, and I avoid attachments by working too much, which denies my need for attachment. And then when I'm in the office and I'm just looking for someone to connect with, employees or other people just happen to be there, and here's my plan for the future in terms of how to address that. I would personally feel much better if he said something like that, but I can't imagine apologists saying that.
In the hope that with a broken spirit and a still strong heart, I can be used for greater good. For we have many blessings and many challenges and so much work to do. In this, I ask for your prayers and for your help in healing our nation. And though I cannot move beyond or forget this, indeed I must always keep it as a caution light in my life.
I think he's wrapping up the apology, which is disappointing. And I also think he's saying, I want you to forget about it. But then he's saying, I'm not going to forget about it because it's important that I keep an eye on this sort of thing. You know, it's a good statement to say. It would be troublesome if he said something like, look, I forgot about it. I want you to forget about it. That wouldn't be very reassuring.
It is very important that our nation move forward. I am very grateful for the many, many people, clergy and ordinary citizens alike, who have written me with wise counsel I am profoundly grateful for the support of so many Americans who somehow through it all seem to still know that I care about them a great deal.
Okay, it's a political speech. So on one hand, if you're watching this, you're just like, okay, really? Within your apology, you're going to be pointing out how everyone loves you and how everyone supports you, as if I don't support you or I still feel hurt by you, then there's something wrong with me. I mean, he's not saying that directly, but you could interpret it that way. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with showing appreciation for the grace and the forgiveness that you have received, right?
That I care about their problems and their dreams. I am grateful for those who have stood by me and who say that in this case and many others, the bounds of privacy have been excessively and unwisely invaded.
Well, we're back to this language again. He still has that language around like, let's move forward. And maybe this is what people wanted to hear at the time. Maybe they wanted to hear him say this. To me, this isn't something you should be saying, especially an apology that's this important, right? For me, as an American, when he gets into this stuff, I'm just like, really? The bulk of your apology was in the first few minutes and was kind of an introduction to an apology in my book. It was good, but it was just an introduction and didn't have a lot of detail. And now we're in the zone where you're talking about moving on.
That may be. Nevertheless, in this case, it may be a blessing. Because I still sinned. And if my repentance is genuine and sustained, and if I can maintain both a broken spirit and a strong heart, then good can come of this for our country, as well as for me and my family.
Okay, the clapping came out of nowhere. It's pretty abrupt.
I asked if you'd ever apologized, and you said you had.
I have.
You've apologized to her.
I apologize to everybody in the world.
Okay, so I thought I would look for other statements that Bill Clinton has made about the incident.
But you didn't apologize to her.
I have not talked to her.
Do you feel like you owe her an apology?
No, I do. I do not. I've never talked to her. But I did say publicly on more than one occasion that I was sorry.
This is something that I want to emphasize, is just saying you're sorry is not enough. Unless you are conveying all the elements of the apology and the other person receives all those other elements. Just saying you're sorry it's usually just an introduction. In fact, among all of my components, I have 12 components that I've developed. You can listen to my deep dive. It's available for patrons. Nowhere in there do I say you should say you're sorry. You should say the words that you're sorry, because one, you can apologize sufficiently without ever saying those words, I am sorry. Two, when I say that to people, often that's all they'll take away from what I'm saying, is they'll say, oh, okay, so I just say I'm sorry and that is sufficient. No. To truly apologize, there are several different things that you have to hit on. And so did he do that in his public apologies? I would say no. Now, I'm not Monica Lewinsky, so I can't be in her shoes and I can't evaluate his apology to Monica Lewinsky without asking her how his apology, because maybe it was sufficient to her. I'm guessing it wasn't. If I were in her shoes, it wouldn't be sufficient. Him claiming, look, I apologized, I said I'm sorry, is, I think, an indication that he doesn't understand really how to apologize, and might even indicate that he doesn't really feel sorrowful, doesn't really feel remorse for what he did. But I don't know that. Let's continue.
That's very different. The apology was public.
What do you think of the former president's response?
Not great. He's had 20 years to do it, and I take his point. As you played, Wolf, he did publicly apologize to virtually everyone, including Monica Lewinsky. He, in that same prayer breakfast, he said, I'm a sinner, and said those things.
Yeah, I wish that we had a different word for apology or different gradations to it or something, because a lot of people will say, as he just said, well, he did apologize. And to me, I'd be like, well, he started an apology, but in my book, he didn't really apologize, didn't fully apologize. So I feel like this notion that you can just say you're sorry and even take responsibility for what you did, that is sufficient, I find to be really bad guidance for all of us. And I think that this is what happens. A lot of times people say, like, look, I said I'm sorry, what else do you want from me? And often if you're the recipient of an apology like that, you're just like, it's not sufficient. And because we don't talk about this enough, a lot of times if you have that feeling of like, well, he did say he's sorry, but for some reason it doesn't feel resolved for me, there can be a lot of confusion around that. It's like, is there something wrong with me? Is it something else? When probably what's happening is you haven't been given a true apology where they fully take responsibility and adequately understand the harm that they did to you and ask you questions and even say, like, do I have that right from you? And really talk about all the work that they've done in terms of trying to figure out why they did what they did. And here's the plan to address that.
I do think it is different. It might just be me. I do think it's different to offer sort of a broad scale public apology that includes someone and to reach out, even if Monica Lewinsky doesn't ever call you back, reach out to try to apologize personally, just because her life for the last 20 years, and I think she's written eloquently about this.
Is that true that he never reached out to her? Yikes. Is that true? My God. So so Bill Clinton's saying, well, I apologize publicly, so what's the big deal? And the apologies publicly were extremely limited and short and insufficient. And you're just like, well, what else do you want from me? I mean, we haven't had an in-person apology. What is he saying? Like, well, she hasn't reached out to me, so...
An apology, but not a personal to her apology. Here's what I would say, Wolf. Even if she doesn't want an apology and didn't ask for it, I do think, given what we now know about what transpired, it is Bill Clinton was a former president of the United States who had an affair with an intern who was in her early 20s, 23, 24 years old. I do not think it is the worst thing in the world for Bill Clinton to have at some point in the last 2 decades say, I understand how difficult this was for you. I'm sorry. I wish we could do it differently. The end. That he hasn't, and that he responded the way he did, from angry, I did this already, how dare you, and basically said, in another clip, he said, 2/3 of the public agreed with me. This is not a public opinion issue. It's not a...
When people commit a transgression, even if the other person doesn't want to talk to you, you should do what you can to communicate your true apology, your remorse, your recognition that you did something truly wrong and that you fully describe that. I consider that to be a moral responsibility, a responsibility as a human, an ethical responsibility. To say that, well, she doesn't want an apology or she hasn't asked for an apology from me, so I'm off the hook. You still did something wrong, and you still should be apologetic about that, and you still should be humble about that.
Nobody believes that I got out of that for free. I left the White House $16 million in debt.
Okay, so he's saying that, well, I suffered a lot, so why do I have to apologize? And, okay, so most of us are not the President of the United States, so this is something that I see a lot in my office. If I could give a really, sharp example, it's when you have a couple and one person cheated on the other person. And the cheating person will say, look, after a portion of time, I've apologized, I've said I'm sorry, I've recognized that it was wrong, I've suffered a lot, you left me for a while, and you know how hard that was on me, and I'm going to therapy, and I'm trying to get you back. It's been 6 months, it's been 12 months. Can you please just move on? And what I will say to the individual who committed infidelity is that the pain and the harm sustains well beyond your apology. The event occurs, and then the harm reemerges. And so in order for everyone to heal, and including for yourself to gain forgiveness and also to do the right thing, it means that you're going to have to periodically go back to that place that you do not want to go, of course, in which you recognize what you did was wrong and you show remorse. It might feel repetitive to you. It might feel unfair that you're constantly being asked to provide that, but that is the reality. Now, if the cheated on partner is being unreasonable and holding on to it unreasonably, then that's a problem for them and they should be apologizing for that. But generally speaking, that's not what occurs. Generally speaking, cheated on partners do not want to hold on. They want to forget it. They don't want to remember it, but the pain reemerges. The pain overwhelms them maybe 6 years later, maybe 60 years later. I've worked with couples where the infidelity happened decades prior, and the cheated on partner is still having feelings about it, particularly because the cheating partner has refused to apologize sufficiently in the intervening years. And so for him to say, like, look, I've suffered, I've already said I'm sorry, can we just move on? I hear that all the time, and I get it. But at the same time, for me, in what I know and what I've experienced in my office and my personal life, it's frustrating. I just want to say, like, just because you say you're sorry, just because you apologize, just because you suffered does not mean that it's over. In fact, Bill Clinton, what I would say to him, the reason why people keep bringing it up is because a lot of people do not feel as though you adequately apologized. Yes, you said you were sorry. Yes, you provided an introduction, but you did not adequately provide an apology. So I hear your frustration, and I recognize that you don't want to face this anymore because it feels bad and it feels like people are holding it over your head, and maybe some people are doing that, but I'm guessing for a lot of people, it's not that. Plus, it's the right thing to do. When people ask you about it, even if it is repetitive, even if they are kind of holding it over your head, you did something terribly wrong. And so you should be apologizing and not get defensive about it. His response negates his original apology. He's coming across like, look, I've already apologized. Everything's fine. I've suffered enough, and let's move on in life. And it makes his original apology look like he was just performing something, right? Because if he truly was apologetic, and this is why when you go through an apology yourself as the apologizer, when you really go through the process, it shifts your paradigm into a place that really allows you to grow, really allows you to sit with the negativity so that you can learn, so that you can empathize with other people, and so that in the future you can return to that place and exhibit that. If he just said to the cameras, yeah, I don't want to think about it, but I was hoping you weren't going to ask me about it. But yeah, I mean, every once in a while, it just kills me what I did. If that's all he said, I bet you that would satisfy a lot of people. Because if you go to that place and you exhibit it and you show it and you convince people with sincere, genuine pain and sorrow and remorse that you feel, a lot of times that's all someone needs. A very common scenario is infidelity happens, it's a couple years later, and the cheating partner is on their phone texting and they're laughing, or something that indicates that they're doing things on social media, because that's often where infidelity begins, or it's perpetuated. And so the cheated on partner will see their partner on their phone and they'll get triggered, right? Or they'll see a text from someone and it'll be kind of in the gray zone, like, who's that from? Is that a woman who texts you? And then this paranoia will kick in, this triggering will happen of just like, am I being rejected again? Has infidelity been happening again? Am I going to get hurt again? Is someone doing this to me again? And then all that fear and all that hurt will reemerge, which is natural. And then the cheated on partner, if the relationship is safe and trustworthy and good enough, the cheated on partner will signal that to the cheating partner and say, who are you texting? Or what's going on there? And if the cheating partner were, again, this is 2 years later, this is 20 years later, if the cheating partner were to look at the victim of the infidelity and say, oh, so you saw that text, and I'm guessing that triggered what I did to you. Is that what's happening? And then the cheating partner says, yeah. And then the cheating partner is just like, yeah, well, one, I'm not cheating. And two, like, I'm so sorry that just because I get a text from someone, it triggers you. Like, it makes sense it would trigger you. I feel so bad about that. But you can see my phone or whatever it is. That might be all that's required. Just that feeling, that genuine, where you genuinely go to that feeling and exhibit it. Now, for some people, they have a really hard time even noticing their emotions or exhibiting their emotions and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole other skill. That's a part of the apology system that I talk about. Being a good apologetic individual means that you are very self-aware, that you have a lot of ability to convey emotion. Not everyone is good at that. That could take 20 years in and of itself to develop. But anyway, so that is pretty short. And when I work on that with my couples, when they eventually get there, those interactions can become literally just 5 seconds. There's a text, the cheated on partner says, oh, what's going on? Like, who was that? And then the cheating partner recognizes, did that trigger you? I'm sorry, do you want to look at it? Oh my God, I really don't want you to think I'm cheating because I'm not. I'm so sorry that I did that to you. End of interaction. Whereas the cheated on individual looks at the phone, sees the text, gets triggered, indicates it. The cheating on partner says, what are you doing? How come we're in? And then the conversation eventually gets to a place where they're talking about the past infidelity, and the cheating partner's like, we've already been down this road, and why are we talking? You need to let it go. And that fight could last for weeks, months, years. when all that was needed in that moment was to go to a place of remorse and empathy. Just sit with it. Humility. We all make mistakes and we hurt each other's feelings. Things happen. Go to that place, convey it, and it's over. And healing happens and trust is built. And I can't tell you, you can hear the frustration in my voice because I have had this conversation so many times with people who commit transgressions, particularly people who cheat. Only about, I would say, half of clients I am able to convince of all that I'm saying right now. A lot of clients are just like, nah, I think my partner's too sensitive. And I'm just like, take it from me as an expert. I read the research. Your partner is not oversensitive. In fact, they're probably tamping down their sensitivity because they feel ashamed of their feelings.
Social media erupting. One user writing, Bill Clinton still refuses to take responsibility for what he did to Monica Lewinsky.
The truth is, the hubbub was I got hot under the collar because of the way the questions were asked. And I think what was lost are the 2 points that I made that are important to me. The suggestion was that I'd never apologized for what caused all the trouble for me 20 years ago. So the first point is, I did. I meant it then and I meant it now. I apologize to my family, to Monica Lewinsky and her family, and to the American people before a panel of ministers in the White House, which was widely reported. So I did that.
Okay, so he's telling us that, look, I have apologized. I feel sorry. Okay, I've been saying this throughout. That's the introduction sentence to 5 paragraphs of you describing in full your sorrow, your remorse, why you're sorry, what you're sorry for. He keeps saying, so many people do this. It's just like, I've said that I was sorry hundreds of times to all sorts of people. Okay, great. You have had a topic sentence for all those people. Now, what else did you say? It's like Albert Einstein saying, oh my goodness, I just discovered the most amazing thing. And then he just walks away and you're like, what did you discover? Like just saying you're sorry, just saying that you apologize to all these people. It's like, okay, great. You had a great start. Where's the rest of it?
I meant it then, and I mean it today. I live with it all the time. The second is that I support the Me Too movement, and I think it's long overdue. And I have always tried to support it in the decisions and policies that I've advanced.
Okay, that could be true. And do you recognize what you did in line with the Me Too movement? When you watch the American Crime Story TV show, they will speculate what was going on behind the scenes, but in all likelihood, it did look like that. When you see it depicted like that, you're just like, wow, Bill Clinton was absolutely preying on someone that was extremely young and very impressionable, and that is awful. He should be recognizing that, and if he really wanted to convey that he understands the Me Too movement and really understands what he did was wrong, that which he is sorry for, then he would identify. He would say something like, I've supported Me Too, and I have to admit that I was part of the problem many years ago with Monica Lewinsky. I didn't see it at the time, but I do see it now, and I feel just mortified about what I did.
I feel terrible about the fact that Monica Lewinsky's life was defined by it, unfairly, I think. You know, over the years, I've watched her trying to get a normal life back again. But you got to decide how to define normal. This is not a defense, it's an explanation. It was awful.
The documentary also detailing how he told the First Lady about his relationship with Lewinsky after he initially lied about it to his family and the country.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
Right. So I've referred to that already. I remember that moment, and that was the huge lie where he thought, well, I'm telling the truth because I'm following the definition that the investigators are using.
I went and sat on the bed and talked to her. I told her exactly what happened, when it happened. I said, I feel terrible about it. I said, you know, we've been through quite a bit in the last 2 years. I said, I have no defense. This is inexcusable what I did.
I was so, personally just hurt. And, I can't believe this. I can't believe you lied. It just, anyway, was horrible.
Okay, I'm glad we're hearing from Hillary around this. She's saying that she was hurt, it was horrible, and we're also hearing what his account of the conversation was. He came forward, he said, I'm so sorry, I don't have any excuse for what I did.
And I said, if this is going to be public, then you have got to go tell Chelsea.
She said, well, you have to go tell your daughter. She said, that's worse than me. And so I did that.
Okay, so I will commend him for that he did the right thing by telling his wife and telling his daughter and not making excuses and not blaming other people when he admitted what he did was wrong. And that is a big part of an apology, is to truly state, I did this wrong thing. And there's no excuse. I'm not blaming anyone else. I have some factors that led to that, but I did this wrong thing. And to do it under the circumstances that he did it, I think conveys that he understands that it was wrong and that it is a big deal and that he does feel sorry. There are a lot of things that can be conveyed through your actions that will meet the requirements of an apology. And it all just depends on what you're saying and what the other person is receiving. So it's possible that to Hillary, the things that he did around the apology or the admission of what he did was sufficient for her in the end. You don't have to follow all my components to the letter and address everyone fully. You can imply a lot of them or convey a lot of the components through your actions. So maybe that's what happened.
Which was awful.
I didn't want anything to do with him. He spent a lot of time, I guess, playing golf and talking to a couple of his friends.
The couple deciding to stay together and seek counseling.
I made a decision to stay with my husband. Look, I think that some people thought I'd made the right decision, and some people thought I made the wrong decision.
I was so grateful that she thought we still had enough to stick it out.
Yeah, I don't know about them, but I will say that there's a general common wisdom out there that if someone cheats on you, you should definitely leave. And if you don't leave, you have no self-respect. And certainly that's one way of looking at it. And I'm not going to argue with that. But there are other ways of looking at it, which is that when infidelity occurs, if you, as the cheated on individual, feel as though, and it might take some time to figure this out, and couples therapy is really recommended, that you might say, well, this is horrible, and I do not want this happening again, but it's worth it to me to try to work this out, to try to recover from the infidelity because this relationship is important enough to me to do that.
Would you want Bill Clinton to see this series?
I don't even know how to really answer that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't.
Do you ever wish that you could speak to him? Do you feel like he owes you an apology after all these years?
There was I think there was a long period before my life changed, the last 6 or 7 years, where I felt a lot in terms of there not being this resolution. And I'm very grateful that I don't have that feeling anymore. I don't need it. He should want to apologize.
Right. So good. I'm glad they're asking Monica Lewinsky that question. Do you think Bill Clinton should apologize? So for her, she's saying there's a time in the past when I did want some closure. Now, she's not saying that she wanted an apology back then, but I think she's implying that it would have helped if he would have apologized. But now she's saying, I don't need that anymore. I've moved on. I don't have those negative feelings anymore, I think is what she's saying. But then she adds, I think he should want to apologize because I think what she's saying is what I've been saying is like, look, it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do.
In the same way that I want to apologize any chance I get to people that I've hurt.
Right. That you, one, should feel bad enough to apologize properly. And two, it feels better to apologize. I get that into all this in the research in the deep dive, that when we apologize, we actually gain a lot of things. There's a lot of benefits to actually apologizing.